you say a second track, but this is just a continuation of the same interview?
Correct, Your Honor. It's the second
Okay.
track.
All right.
Yes.
And the time now is 10:28. We're gonna start back up. It only took 5 minutes, man. Well, one of the things Manny and I were talking about was it common knowledge about where she lived?
Yeah, I think so. She lived right there in the middle of town.
I mean, did you know where she lived?
I didn't actually know where she lived.
Did he ever take you to the house? Did he ever take you by the house?
No.
Did you take Brooke by the house?
No. I've never been to her house,
Okay.
actually. I know where it's at.
Like generally, or?
Yeah.
Do you remember the street?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I know, I can probably guess which one, but
Like, could you like tell me what the house looked like?
no.
Okay.
And I lived in Osceola for 4 years. I mean, so streets over, but
When did you live in Osceola?
from 99 to 02.
When you graduated? Where did you live? What was the address, man? Do you remember? What street?
601 West 5th Street.
And Tara was living there at the time too, if I'm not mistaken, the same house, wasn't she?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Did Ryan live in Fisherman? I mean, in Minnesota?
No, we lived out at Pleasure.
Okay. Was Tara, I mean, I know she was into the pageants and stuff. Did you know that she was into the pageants, or did she have some sort of other affiliation that you knew that she was a part of?
I knew she was. I didn't really know about that. The cheerleaders, I think she was involved in cheerleading.
Okay.
That's what I remember from. I played football there, and I knew she was involved in cheerleading school.
I'm assuming you've heard on the news since this all happened. I'm sure if anything ever came out, or anything that we've done recently, and I know it's been in the news a lot.
Yeah.
When you see those news articles, I mean, what kind of, when you hear people saying, oh, somebody, they're the ones that did it, or they're the ones that did it, you know, they're putting the blame on all these other people other than Ryan, you know.
Yeah, it's something else that accumulates on you. You know, I guess not just for her family and all, but so many people have had their reputations damaged by this. It's just another reason why to go ahead and do this. Yeah.
anything else you can think of, anything you think's important?
No.
Last, do you have anything?
No.
Okay. As we move forward, obviously what we'd like to do is go down here today. You're good with that?
Yes.
I'm assuming did y'all ride together? Did y'all meet here?
We didn't. We met here.
Okay. What's your plans for, well, we'll get to that. Obviously, there may be some other things that come up that I want to communicate about with you. Rather than read you the waiver of rights, you understand that moving forward from this, that waiver is going to continue, and I'll remind you of it. Any conversation we have is going to be recorded. But he'll be reminded of those, you're still aware that the rights waiver that you signed is still in effect, you're still willing to have conversations, so on and so forth. That's going to be from this moment on, obviously that's what we're going to do. While we're driving down here, are y'all going to ride together going down, or how do y'all think going to?
We hadn't discussed that. Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that. We'll do the logistics on that when we get done with the interview. But yeah, we definitely like you to show us this location. What we're going to do is we're going to go to this one first, show us this one, we can document it, and then we'll go to this location.
Okay.
We'll probably pull in down the one with the big white picket fence. We'll just pull in that way. It seems to be the easiest way to get back to that corner. The orchard is through that, because I drove it yesterday, and the orchard looks to be solid.
There's one other way into too.
Okay. Well, this seems to be like the easiest way.
Yeah.
We'll go past that shed on the left,
Yeah.
and then just turn around. Okay. Well, the time now is 10:35.
Agent Shoudel, I want to ask you a couple of questions about the interview that you did there with Mr. Dukes. Is it unusual to use tactics with suspects when you're interviewing them?
No, it's not unusual.
Okay. When I say tactics, can you explain kind of what I mean by that?
What I believe you mean is just different ways that we'll approach somebody and talk to them to try to get them to open up, or talk about things that are an uncomfortable topic to talk about. Obviously, we're involved in criminal investigations. Usually persons that have committed offenses don't usually want to talk about them, so to get them to open up, there are different ways that you can use to try to get them to open up and talk to them.
Now, in this interview, you talked with him about taking a recording device and recording conversations between he and Ryan Duke. Did that ever occur?
No. He contacted him via Facebook Messenger that afternoon and that evening. Had a conversation with him via the Facebook Messenger, which he then sent to us later.
But there was no where he was sitting in with a recording device to have a conversation with Ryan or anything like that?
No.
All right. Now, during the interview, Mr. Dukes tells you about a laundromat where some things were. Did you go to that location? Are you familiar with where that laundromat is?
I am.
And can you tell me about that, please?
Yeah, we went by, I can't remember exactly what day off the top of my head, but I did go by the laundromat, viewed the laundromat, and took photographs of, there's some dumpsters on the backside. I just took overall photographs of the dumpsters that were there in that parking lot area.
Now,
I believe it was the same day after we had finished going down to the orchard with Bo that day. I think when we got done with that, we stopped by, I think Agent Holland was with me, we stopped by there, took some photographs, and then we were going to do another interview.
Now, this was in 2017 when you went to the laundromat, is that right?
Yes, sir, if I recall.
Now, did you find any keys or a purse there that would have belonged to Ms. Grinstead?
No, sir, we did not.
through your investigation, were you able to confirm that in fact Ms. Grinstead did have a belly button ring?
Yes.
In 2016, at the time that you interviewed John McCulloch, was there an open investigation into the disappearance and to what happened to Ms. Grinstead?
In 2016, when I talked to John?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then still in 2017, when you talked with Bo, was it still an open investigation at that time?
Yes.
And with regard to the GBI, y'all are a state agency of investigation for the state of Georgia, is that right?
Yes, sir, we are.
Now, you mentioned just a few minutes ago that following this interview on February the 21st of 2017 with Mr. Duke and Mr. Fox about going to the orchard itself, is that right?
Correct.
And when we talk about the orchard, what are we talking about? What is the orchard?
It's a pecan farm that was, it's just north of the city of Fitzgerald on the right-hand side. I'd say, you know, a couple mile to 2 miles just north of Fitzgerald on 129, Bowensville Highway. You can see it from the road as you're driving past, but the gate that we used to go in is an actual, there's a residence, there's like a long white fence, and then you turn into that fence and it pulls back into, it's cut now, but there was trees on both sides. So you couldn't really see, there's 2 metal sheds that were out there as you pull down in the road, and there's an orchard, that whole orchard is on your left. And there was a little pond, if you remember when we were talking about the interview and I showed him the photographs, he was talking about a little pond that was by these sheds. And then we would turn left to go down into that back corner of the orchard. And as we got down pretty close to that corner, they stopped the vehicle and got out and described.
You say they got out, who you're referring to?
Mr. Fox and Bo and myself and Agent Holland. We had some other agents there. I can't remember who all was there at the time, but we did have some other agents there. And initially, when we were doing the interview, he pointed out an area of where the body originally was in the orchard when he first saw it. So that's the location where he stopped and pointed out to that this is the general area where that body was located when he first brought me out here. Talking about Ryan bringing Bo out there back in 2005. And then, so we were videoing as we were doing this. And then we moved further down into we all parked at the corner right there because the little road that goes off in the woods, so we just parked on the corner of that orchard and we all walked into the woods together, turning down a little lane there initially and trying to find the area where they had burned the body.
Okay. I'm going to show you a series of photographs. Being States Exhibits 33 through 37. And ask if you'll look at each of those, please, sir.
Sure. You want me to describe each one?
Just look at all of them first, please.
Okay.
With regard to each of those exhibits, State Exhibits 33 through 37, are you familiar generally with what's shown in each of those photographs?
I am.
And generally what is shown in each of those photographs?
State's Exhibit number 33 is a photograph, as I was describing that location just before you get to that corner to walk down into the woods. He's walking us in this picture. This is a still shot from the video, but he's walking us to the location where the body was originally at when he first saw it. At the orchard, which is on the right-hand side there as you're going down the last row of that orchard.
Let me before we do a great description of it, generally with regard to each of those photographs, do they truly accurately depict the orchard there that you went to with Mr. Dukes?
Yes, sir, they do.
And are you shown in those photographs yourself?
I am. Myself and Agent Holland are in several of these.
All right. Do each of those photographs truly and accurately depict the orchard as you saw it back on February 21st of 2017 when you went with this defendant, Mr. Dukes?
They do.
All right. Judge, this time I would tender State's Exhibits 33 through 37.
Any objection? All right, they're admitted.
Agent Shoudel, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 33. If you will, the first two are the persons in the photograph.
The blue shirt is obviously Bo. He's still wearing the same shirt that he had on during the interview. I'm the one standing to his right, and Agent Holland is the one standing in the back. So closest, in the photo closest to.
What is this area we're looking at generally, and then more specifically?
This is the back corner of the orchard. If you're looking at it in the direction where you see the pine trees, kind of right above where my head is on the photo in this photograph, there you'll see the last pine tree or the last pecan trees right there as this row ends. There's a little dirt lane that cuts into those pine trees right there, just about where my head is at in that photograph. And on the right-hand side right here towards this corner, this back corner is where Bo pointed out the body was originally placed.
Agent Shoudel, if Your Honor, please, and may you step down just for a second?
Yes, to be sure the court reporter can pick you up.
Yes, sir.
We'll use this, and just on this screen here, if you'll show us, indicate the area where Mr. Dukes first said he saw the body located.
Right. He was talking about this general area right in here where he originally saw the body, which is the back corner of this orchard. He said it wasn't like right here in the orchard. He said it was just off to the side in this taller grass area. So if you're just walking out here, you couldn't see it, but if you were walking about where we were, you could walk up and readily see it.
And from that location, where would the location be to where he indicated they had moved the body?
Sure, they moved the body from this general location here, and like I said, right here about where my head is, right through here is a little dirt lane that goes off, and this is pecan trees, but this is a pine tree grove, like planted pines where somebody would farm pine trees.
Now, with regard to Bowens Mill Highway, if we're talking about Bowens Mill Highway with this photograph, where would Bowens Mill Highway be on this photograph, if you will, please?
Like this. Obviously, it's several hundred yards to the left here, but Bowens Mill Highway kind of runs like this. So it would be obviously several hundred yards, 200 or 300 yards to the left, but it's running north and south like this.
Okay, thank you, sir. Show you State's Exhibit number 34. You able to see that, Agent Shoudel?
Yes, sir, I am.
Tell me about that photograph, please.
As you can see, that the little dirt lane that I was describing in the previous photograph, this is as we're actually walking down into the dirt lane, into the pine trees. You can see the pine trees there all around. This was a first little cut lane. I say cut lane, but you could see it was there was a lane of some sort there at some point that went into that head of woods there. And obviously I'm walking with Bo right there with the blue shirt on, and Agent Holland is behind us, and you can actually see his phone in his hand. He was recording as well. But we're trying to get Bo to show us the location of where the body was burned.
Showing you State's Exhibit number 35.
Yes, sir.
What is that?
Once again, in the prior photo, you see us walking down that lane. This is as we've gotten down into that little area. You can see it's kind of open. So we're trying to get him to try to remember where exactly the burned area was located, where they may have burned the remains.
State's Exhibit 36.
Yes, sir. Once again, this is the same area. We're having a discussion, trying to get him to remember if this is the right area. He was struggling a bit to try to point out the exact area. He presumed that this was the right area at that time.
And State's Exhibit number 37.
Once again, same area where we were. I mean, same clothing, obviously. Same location, that same general little open area where he originally thought that that's where the body may have been burned.
Now, After Mr. Dukes had indicated locations of where the body may have been burned there where Ms. Grinstead's body had been burned there in the orchard, that afternoon, did you go to another location to see a person known as Ryan Alexander Duke?
I did,
And where did you go to see Ryan Alexander Duke?
at his residence on Pleasure Lake.
And did you actually make contact and speak with Ryan Alexander Duke on that same day, February 21st of 2017?
I did.
Following your seeing Ryan Alexander Duke on February 21st of 2017, did you schedule an interview with Ryan Alexander Duke?
I did for the following day,
And where was that interview to occur?
at the Osceola Police Department at 1 o'clock.
So on the following day, that is on February the 22nd of 2017, did you in fact interview Ryan Alexander Duke?
I did, along with Agent Holland. Madison Holland, since there's two of them.
With regard to Mr. Duke, during that interview, did you take buccal swabs or DNA from Mr. Duke at that time?
I did.
Tell me how you did that, please.
Similarly, as I described with Bo, I had a search warrant for Ryan's DNA at the time. So during the interview, I advised him that I did have a search warrant for his DNA and that we were going to collect it. It's the same process as I described before. The DNA kit is in a sealed package that I'll open up right then, fill out some of the paperwork that goes along with it. There's 2 cotton swabs in a sealed paper wrap. There's a folding envelope with there's a folding piece of paper with an envelope inside. And there's some paperwork you have to fill out: social security number, date of birth, name. Get them to review that information and have them sign it. What I'll do is I'll put the gloves on. After the paperwork part is filled out, I'll put the gloves on. I'll open up the little paper wrap where the cotton swabs are located. I'll pull them out. I will put one on each side of the mouth for approximately 10 seconds. Kind of do like this for just a second, let them air dry, and then I will put them into back into the same package they came out of, because it's a sterile package. Close the package, and I'll place it back into the envelope, which is in that little white folding identifier, is what I call it. That little fold goes into a cellophane bag that is sealed. Actually, excuse me, first, when you put the cotton swabs into that envelope that's in that fold, you'll seal it with a red seal, evidence tape, and initial it. Then you'll close it up, put it into the cellophane bag. After you put it in the cellophane bag, you put it into another white envelope, and you seal that up with another red evidence seal. And then there's another manila envelope with a seal kit that I'll put it in that and seal it, and then put it into another manila envelope and put red evidence tape around it, and that's what goes to the crime lab.
Okay. Did you do that with Mr. Duke's buccal swabs or DNA swabs that day?
I did.
And were they sent to the GBI crime lab for analysis?
They were.
Following your interview with Ryan Duke, did you go with Mr. Ryan Duke anywhere?
I did.
And where was that?
To the orchard. He directed us to the orchard.
And when we're saying he, who is that that's directing you?
Ryan Duke, when we completed the interview at the Osceola Police Department, we asked him to take us to the orchard, which he did.
Show you a series of photographs. Being States Exhibits 38 through 41. Ask you to look at those, please.
Okay.
Are you familiar with what's shown in each of those photographs?
Yes, I am.
Generally, what do each of those photographs show?
These are depictions, photographs of when we took Ryan out to the location in the orchard, which was actually previously shown in Mr. Duke's photographs, just trying to see if he can identify whether or not that was the location where the body was burned.
Do each of those photographs truly and accurately depict the orchard, as well as when you took Ryan Alexander Duke to the orchard then on February the 22nd of 2017.
These photographs depict the pine tree grove. There's obviously the orchard is not pictured in this, but the general location, yes, sir.
Judge, at this time I would tender State's Exhibits 38 through 41.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, they're admitted.
Agent Shoudel, showing you State's Exhibit. Number 38. You will tell me about this photograph, please, sir.
Sure, this is myself and Ryan Duke standing in front of me. You can see he's got a cigarette in his right hand and he's handcuffed. He was in custody at this time. We drove to that same, well, actually we drove down a little bit in my vehicle. He was riding in the vehicle with me and Agent Holland to this location. We actually drove down that little dirt lane closer to where this area is, which this area is the same general area that that we had Bo in the day before. And he's trying to identify the location of where the body was burned.
State's Exhibit number 39.
Once again, this is myself and Ryan Duke, and we're walking around and he's trying to make a determination of whether or not he remembers that being the area where the body was burned.
State's Exhibit number 40.
This is Ryan Duke. He's walking around in this same area, kind of making circles, just trying to find, he's peeking around bushes and trees and trying to see if he could recognize anything that stood out to him as the location where the body was burned.
State's Exhibit number 41.
Additionally, this is that same general location. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner of the photograph, you can see a gridded out area, which is, once again, this is the day after Bo had indicated. So we had a forensic anthropologist and some of our crime scene specialists, I believe, there. And they were gridding out the area and trying to make a search whether or not they could find any remains.
Now, was Mr. Ryan Alexander Duke able to give you a definite location of where he believed that the body was burned?
No.
With regard to the location where Mr. Bo Dukes had shown where her body was originally located, was Mr. Ryan Alexander Duke able to give you a location of where her body was originally located?
Yes, when we were driving out there, I think I asked him, I'm pretty certain I asked him, do you remember where the body was located when you brought her out here? And he pointed to the same, almost the same general location that Bo had pointed out just the day before, which was on that right-hand side in that first photograph as we're walking down that orchard side. He pointed out that area on the right-hand side and said that's where he put the body originally.
Now, with regard to the interview with Bo Dukes, I'm referring you back to your interview that would be Tuesday, February the 21st of 2017 with Mr. Dukes that we heard in the courtroom. Did Mr. Bo Dukes ever mention anything to you about a 411 call?
No. You can hear during the interview I actually was asking him about whether or not he had a cell phone or whether Ryan had a cell phone at the time.
Why was that information something you wanted to question Mr. Bo Dukes about?
It's guilty knowledge for us. We always suspected that, and once again, I wasn't the original case agent when this all happened. Other agents had worked this case years before I became the case agent. But I became aware after becoming that case agent from one of the agents who did some of the work on the phone records, his name is Bill Baudry, that there was a 411 telephone call made to Grinstead's house from a convenience store on that Sunday morning. And at the time, it was never made public. it's never been made public until recently, that we knew that there was a phone call made, and we always suspected there was some kind of connection, but we didn't know what it was at the time. But we always kept it in-house, and we never told anybody about it. So, particularly when we start talking to them, and he's admitting that, he helped, dispose of the body, and Ryan's the one that murdered her, and, those are guilty things that we're trying to see if they're going to tell us without us actually telling them about it. We don't want to tell them about it before they say it, because then we're just telling them what to say. But if they say it openly before we ever question them about it or say anything about it, and they just volunteer the information, that guilty knowledge, the only people who are going to know it is the one who made the phone call or us, because we know about it.
Okay. And in fact, Mr. Bodukes did not mention anything about that phone call in your interview with him. Is that right?
He did not.
Now, with regard to State's Exhibit Exhibit 42, ask you to look at that.
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the person shown in that photograph?
Yes, sir, I am.
And who is in that photograph?
Sure. State's Exhibit number 42 is a photograph of Bo Dukes.
Is it a true and accurate depiction of Mr. Bodukes as he looked back in 2017?
Yes, sir.
Right. Judge, I would tender State's Exhibit number 42.
Any objection?
No, Judge.
All right, it's a minute.
I have nothing further. Agent Shoudel.
All right, Mr. Fox, you may cross examine.
Thank you.
Morning, Agent Shoudel.
Morning, John.
You became the case agent for the Grinstead case in 2009?
Yes,
Okay. At that time, you replaced Special Agent Leah Leitner?
I did.
Okay. When you are assigned to, well, let me ask you this. Prior to becoming the case agent in the Grinstead case, had you worked on the case at all?
I did a couple things. When I was a deputy in Thomasville, there was somebody that I helped, one of the agents. His name was Sean Edgar. I helped him do an interview in reference to that case when I was a deputy sheriff. That's the first time I'd ever heard about that case. And then when I got to the office in Perry, there was a few interviews that I had done prior to becoming the case agent, or going with Agent Leitner and SAC Rothwell to go do an interview or collect a sample of DNA from somebody.
Okay. So you had had some contact with the case prior to
A
becoming
little
the lead
bit, yes.
case agent?
Very little, but yes.
Okay. Once you became the lead case agent, did you review the prior work and file that had been developed by the previous special agents who had worked on it?
Some, yes, not all.
And it was a voluminous file at that point
Yes.
in time?
Once again, at that point, I'm working all the cases that we have at this particular time. Not that Tara's case was ever a cold case, but it was an older case, and so you can only do so much at a time, because you have a lot of other new cases coming in, so it was a little bit of both.
You have to prioritize your assets?
Yes, sir.
All right, fair enough.
And I'm not putting light that this wasn't important. It was very important, but you're doing a little bit of work at a time to try to catch up to, 4 years of work prior to you becoming involved.
Absolutely. Saying you don't have time to go back and double check everything the prior case agents had done and determine if there's something they hadn't followed up on, whether you need to follow up.
You try to. I can't say that that's always the case, but you try to do it the best you can, yes.
Sure. I know you interviewed Dixie Hudson on March 13, 2017,
Yes, sir.
and Jake Dukes on May 24th, 2017, correct?
Yes, sir. I think so. That's right, Dave.
Prior to those interviews, had you or anyone at the GBI spoken with either Dixie Hudson or Jake Dukes?
Not that I can recall, no.
Thank you. And prior, in preparing for this trial, you've reviewed the case file, your summaries.
My summaries, yes, I've reviewed them.
Did you review the prior summaries generated by Agent Leitner and the previous case agent?
Pertaining to this?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you. Does the GBI use civilian contractors or other non-GBI employees to assist in these investigations or to review documents, run down non-sensitive information?
I mean, we do get requested, and we will on occasion have the locals, and just an example, sometimes we will en route to a crime scene or something, because it usually takes us a little bit longer to get there. So when we get there, we want to hit the ground running. So like a search warrant, like the locals could help us write the search warrant prior to us getting there as an example of that. But yes, we will cooperate with other agencies the best we can.
Okay. Well, what about civilian contractors, though, not local law enforcement agencies?
Right, local law enforcement, yes. I'm not aware of any like civilian, if you'll describe what you mean by civilian contractors.
Well, for example, I believe that one of the individuals who had worked on the case is a doctor from Kennesaw. She's not an employee of the GBI.
Correct.
She would be a civilian contractor.
Yeah, okay, yes, we would,
Okay, so there are times that civilian contractors are used in these cases?
yes. Well, at least in this case, I don't know that I've used them that much in any other cases. Maybe we have, but I can't say for sure.
Well, and for the GBI, this case is unique, given just the sheer amount of volume that information, evidence, things that have been developed since 2005.
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, June 2016, John McCullough called into the GBI.
He did,
All right. Logan Holland passed that message to you the
Correct.
same day.
yes,
All right. And you called him back. I believe you said the same day.
I did.
All right. Now, that call was not recorded.
No,
Okay. Now, when you spoke with him later in 2018, you
Yes.
called him on the phone and were able to record that conversation.
yes.
Put it on speakerphone. On that day, when you called Mr. McCullough, June 14, 2016, why didn't you just put the call on a speakerphone and then record that conversation?
I could have, but like I said, I got back to the office. I called on the landline. It wasn't on my cell phone, so I just called the landline. We had gotten information like this before. This isn't the first time that, we've called somebody who's called them back, hey, what information do you have? Whether or not it's pertinent or not. We didn't know what information he would have had at the time. So it's just a general phone call. What information do you have? We don't know if it's true or factual. We're going to go and follow up on that. And then if a follow-up is needed, we'll do the follow-up, which is what we did. It was determined that we needed a follow-up recorded interview because the information he had given seemed to be credible at that point, so we needed to follow up with a recorded interview.
And given that it wasn't recorded, you took written notes as you were speaking with Mr. McCullough?
I did.
Okay. And I believe we heard from GBI yesterday that those notes are then reduced to an investigative summary.
Yes.
Okay. How long from the time the notes are taken until they are reduced to a written summary?
In this particular case, I actually dictated this on the same day that I did the interview.
Okay.
So I did the interview, and then according to this, our investigative summaries are date stamped. So I generated the investigative summary, on the 16th. 16th is when I generated the investigative summary, so 2 days after.
All right. You take detailed notes?
I take pretty good notes.
All right.
You can see from the video when we were interviewing with Bo, I took probably 10 pages at least.
Absolutely. What happens to your notes after you dictate your investigative summary?
They're shredded.
So you would agree that it is essential when creating these investigative summaries that you include as much information,
Yes,
all
there's
the
much pertinent
information
information.
contained in your notes?
Yes, it's once again, it's a summary of, what we talk about, but if there are, very important points or key points, you obviously want to document those.
Because you would be looking for things that could corroborate the information being given to you, or on
Correct.
the other hand, suggest that it may not be true.
Correct.
Now, you're familiar with the statement Mr. McCullough gave you in the summary you created on June 14, 2016.
Yes,
All right. And he told you he was in basic at Fort Sill with Mr. Dukes.
yes,
And if you need to refresh your recollection at all, I believe you have up there with you your investigative summary, but this one is Exhibit 1902.
I'm looking at it.
All right, very good. Told you that during their exodus from basic, the Christmas holiday, that he traveled to Ocilla and met
Yes.
Mr. Dukes, that he spent time with Mr. Dukes' family, that he drove around in Mr. Dukes' mother's car, that he borrowed a white F-150 long bed. And he told you that while they were riding around in Ocilla, Dukes said to him, "You're my battle buddy," right?
Yep.
He also told you it takes 2,000 degrees to burn a body, but pecan wood burns really hot.
Yes.
And he told you that those statements were made only after Mr. McCullough and Mr. Dukes saw a missing persons poster for Miss Grinstead.
Right. He indicated while they were driving around, that he saw the poster of Miss Grinstead. Once again, I wasn't in Ocilla at the time, but I've been told that there were, numerous, missing persons posters, so forth, billboards around, yes.
And there's no reason to doubt that based on everything you know about the case.
Right.
There was a lot of interest in finding her. Mr. McCullough then tells you, Mr. Dukes told him, Dukes had been contacted by Tara Grinstead's boyfriend to
Correct.
help him. Those were Mr. McCullough's words, not
Absolutely.
just your interpretation. You were just
Yes.
writing down what he told you.
Right. He's telling me that, and once again, you look at the time I'm generating this, we hadn't done a second interview. We hadn't even interviewed Bo. Well, I'd interviewed Bo earlier, but, yeah, we didn't know that. I mean, we're just basing it off of what he's saying.
Right. You're just, in your report, you're putting down accurately what McCullough tells you.
Correct.
All right. So he tells you he had been, that is, Bo had been contacted by Grinstead's boyfriend to help him.
Right.
Dukes did not say the boyfriend's name.
Correct.
Dukes drove the F-150 and met the boyfriend where Grinstead's, drove the F-150 and then met Grinstead's boyfriend. The boyfriend and Dukes then loaded the body into the truck. They then drove it to a pecan orchard and burned it.
Yep. To nothing.
And McCullough relayed that Dukes said the boyfriend had gotten upset and jealous with Grinstead, which provoked an argument leading to a physical altercation where she was beaten and strangled.
That's what he said.
All right. Mr. McCullough then stated to you he had waited this long to follow up with the GBI because he thought Dukes may have just been intoxicated.
Correct. He acted, once again, over the time, Bo had told other people, and I think the same thing that he had relayed. Of course, I found this out afterwards, but that he just didn't believe what he was saying at the time was true.
Sure. And you've heard that. We heard during Mr. Dukes' interview with you, when he sat down and talked with you, gave you a lot of names, and that's what most of the people had told you, is that they just didn't believe what had been said because they thought he'd been intoxicated.
And I'm not the one that interviewed him. I've talked with agents that did, but yes, that's mostly what they said, yes.
That's what's relayed in the investigative reports and summaries you reviewed.
Correct. Myself or other agents that did the interviews.
Thank you. And then McCullough told you that he did not have any other further information or details to provide you.
Correct.
And I'm assuming that you asked him, especially hearing somebody say the boyfriend had contacted Mr. Dukes.
Right.
That had been your theory that had been investigated and looked at as whether a boyfriend may have been involved in this case.
Correct. Or former boyfriend, yes.
Okay. And that
Once again, it's pertinent information. That's why it's in the summary. That, to me, at the time, that's very important information that he's relaying.
I mean, that stands out to you that McCullough is saying boyfriend.
Yes.
Okay. But unlike the instances of guilty knowledge you had described earlier, the telephone call, things of that nature, the media, the public knew that the boyfriend had been looked at in
Correct.
this case. That was not a secret in 2016.
Right. Once again, that's why we'll generate the summary. Some of this information, not particularly with Mr. Dukes, but, you've heard over the time, of course, the time that you'll hear people, repeat rumors. And so we have to follow them out and we have to vet it out no matter what.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Now, during that interview, Mr. McCullough did not tell you that Mr. Dukes had made any statements to him about this matter while they were in basic training before Exodus.
No, he said that it was during the Exodus, then they were driving around, and because he wouldn't have known about, and that's another thing, he wouldn't have known about Miss Grinstead at the time until they got driving around, and that goes back to what he says, I saw the posters, they got to talking about the posters, wow, I think there was a large reward, and that's when they started the conversation, and then he said at some point during that, they were drinking, intoxicated, driving around, and he tells them about the 2,000 degrees to burn the body, and so on and so forth.
And that is based on the original conversation you had with Mr. McCullough. That's the
Correct.
story he relayed. It all
Exactly.
happened while on Exodus, while they're driving in the car after seeing the poster.
Yes,
Okay. During the original interview with Mr. McCullough, he did not tell you that he had previously called law enforcement in Fitzgerald, Georgia, to report
no,
this.
he did not. He did in the subsequent interview, but he didn't in that interview.
Okay. And that was even after you had asked him, do you have any further information, anything
Correct.
else bearing on it?
Correct. Because once again, that information is in my second summary, which is readily available, and obviously that's pertinent information.
But he didn't tell you that first time.
No,
He didn't tell you that he had called other local law enforcement offices throughout the years and had never gotten a response.
no,
He didn't tell you that he had sent a Facebook message to one of the groups trying to locate Ms. Grinstead or get information on her.
no, sir. Once again, the only thing he ever said about local law enforcement, I think, was 2008 or 2009. He said he contacted local law enforcement. I think I asked him, what law enforcement did you call? And I think he indicated maybe Osceola and the sheriff's office there. And I wrote it in my investigative summary. That was, obviously pertinent.
And that was the 2018 summary, though,
Correct,
not the 2016 summary.
correct.
Okay. In the 2016 conversation you had with Mr. McCullough, did he ever tell you that he had called the GBI multiple times with no response?
No,
Okay. And in fact, when he called the GBI in 2016, that same day, the agent who gets the message passes it to you, and you're calling him back.
correct.
And that's because you were taking lead seriously at that point in time.
Well, I take every lead seriously, but
Absolutely.
I mean, if somebody's calling that's going to give information about a case, we obviously want to reach out as quickly as possible because if they're calling, then they want to be heard. So you got to give them the opportunity to be heard.
The GBI just wouldn't ignore that call coming in.
I would hope not.
Have you ever seen anything in your investigative summaries, notes, anything to do with this case to suggest that Mr. McCullough had ever contacted the GBI prior to June 2016?
I have not seen anything.
Thanks. Now, in the years following that, you've developed a lot of information about this case.
The years following,
Well, since 2016.
Okay.
2016 through now.
yes, sir.
Okay. You've spoken with a number of people who Bo relayed to you that he had told about this.
Correct. Or other agents have, yes, sir.
Other agents have. Mr. McCullough is the only person who has ever stated that Bo told them that it was a boyfriend who had called him originally.
That I remember, yes.
Thanks. And based on your investigation and the facts you've developed, it was Ryan Duke who took Bo's truck without his knowledge to pick up Ms. Grinstead's body from her home and take it out to the edge of the pecan orchard that you had pointed out.
You're asking me to relay what he said during my interview?
No, I'm just
or-
asking if that's your understanding.
Yes,
Thank you. It wasn't that Bo had gone to her house to assist someone picking up her body.
no,
Now, when the GBI would get a tip concerning the Grinstead case and would have specific names, would the GBI run that name through the existing case file, any database associated with that file, to determine whether that name had come up in the investigation before?
I did it in this case.
You did it in this case?
Right, when John called, I typed in Bo's name into the way the GymNet system works is that you have a name and you type it in, but it only searches for, and I didn't find this out till later, but if we haven't generated what we call identification data at the time, which is, the identifier's name, date of birth, social security number, and enter that into the system, our system won't just pull that up. Like, it won't do like a word search the entire case file or case files. It only does it if we have ID data. So I remember actually typing Bo's name into the database, the search, and it didn't pop up with anything.
Okay. And is that because in 2008, when Agent Leitner spoke with Janice Paulk and Andy Paulk, and they relayed information concerning Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes, their names were not entered into the identifier database?
Correct.
Had their names been entered in that database, you would have found that out in 2016.
Yes.
Thank you. You met with Mr. Dukes June 16, 2016.
Yes,
Okay, that was here in Rochelle, and that's just because it was the most convenient location to meet with him.
for him it was. He seemed like, once again, he seemed like he was in between or having to go to work. I think he said he had to be at work at like 8 o'clock or something like that, so I scheduled it for just after 7 so he could make it to work.
And you accommodated him by meeting him pretty early in the morning down here.
I did,
Came down voluntarily,
yes,
and you recorded that conversation.
I did.
Okay, that is the conversation that we heard yesterday afternoon.
It was.
And that's the entire conversation. There was nothing asked or answered before or after that recording started.
Correct, other than, I may have said, hey, thanks for coming down prior to the interview, but nothing more than that. And then
Outside-
thanking him afterwards, thank you for coming down, I'll be in touch if I need to be.
Other than greetings and pleasantries,
Correct.
nothing asked, nothing answered.
Correct.
Thank you. And he gave you a DNA sample.
He did?
And since that sample has been received, you have not had a confirmed match for his DNA in this case.
No.
Thank you. Now, the next time you met with Mr. Dukes was February 19, 2017.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was a meeting at the GBI office,
Correct.
one which you had facilitated
I did?
between Mr. Dukes and his counsel and the district attorneys for the appropriate counties.
Yes,
so
sir.
that they could meet.
Yes,
It's your understanding that Mr. Dukes was interested in speaking with you.
yes.
After introducing the parties, you walked out of the room.
Correct,
That conversation was not recorded to your knowledge.
correct,
You don't know what was said one way or another.
correct.
You've never asked anyone since then what was said in that room.
I've talked with the DAs. I've asked if, I think later on, and they've been very not wanting to talk about it. Obviously this is now. They did talk about it. They did have conversations with you and with Bo. There was, and I asked specifically, is there any deal? Was there any deal at the time? This is, once again, this is recent, and I was told there was no deal given.
Now, you weren't in the room to know exactly what was said.
Absolutely not.
Okay, but it's your understanding there was no specific agreement to plead any specific charges?
Correct.
For immunity or anything like that?
Correct.
Okay. You came back in the room 30 minutes later.
Yes, sir, approximately.
At that point in time, the district attorneys left, and Mr. Dukes gave you a name,
He did.
gave you a location,
He did.
and gave you an outline of his understanding of what happened in his involvement.
He just, it was brief. He just said, there was photograph, I showed him a picture of the orchard. He said, that's the right orchard, that's the right location. He said that the body was burned by he and Ryan out there, and that Ryan had killed her.
Okay. And you set up a meeting for the 21st.
Correct.
All right. And he left, was not under arrest.
Correct.
He came back and met with you on the 21st.
He did.
All right. And he gave you details,
Many.
many details. You questioned him again about Mr. McCullough's statements.
I did.
in that. And when you asked him about McCullough, Mr. Dukes told you, I don't remember the conversation I had with him, but he did tell you, looking back on everything, I would imagine it took place. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And then he also again told you, I don't remember the conversation. We were probably drinking a lot that night.
Right, he's referring to the conversation from 2006 with McCullough.
That's correct,
Okay.
on Exodus. But again, he agreed with you that it was more likely than not that he had told Mr. McCullough something.
Correct.
All right. You've
I mean,
not charged-
he gave the exact same, Mr. McCullough had given us the exact same information generally about the burning of the body. And
Not
that he
every
had-
detail matches up, but in a
Correct.
general broad stroke.
Right, the burning of the body in a pecan orchard,
All right.
so on and so forth.
And Mr. Dukes then gave you a list of people he had told.
Yes,
It was at least 7 names.
yes,
And these were people who were friends, they were family, they were members of the community. And he didn't hold that information back from you.
no,
He gave you their phone numbers,
he did,
knew that they would be contacted.
yes. He was
And-
very cooperative about that.
Yes.
as anybody can see.
At that point, he was holding nothing back from you.
Appeared to be, yes.
Yes. And were you ever able to determine whether any of those people he named had ever come forward to law enforcement to report what he had told them?
No.
Not a single one of them?
Once again, I didn't interview all of them, but I don't recall that any of them came forward with that information. There was another person that wasn't named that had come forward back then, but not any of the names that he mentioned back then, no.
And of course, that's something you would look at because that is corroboration.
Correct. That's why we're getting the information when I talked to him, who else was with you when it was said, who else was there. That's the idea, is to corroborate independently just beyond what he's telling us that that's what happened or took place.
Absolutely. He also told you during that interview that he had had no contact with Ryan Duke since 2007, except for a time that Duke had sent a Facebook message to he and another friend, and that was March 8 of 2016.
Correct.
And thereafter, there was a message sent from Duke to Mr. Dukes, February 16, 2017. Another Facebook message?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you tried to independently verify that was accurate,
Yes, he actually, about the messages,
well, that there had been no contact or additional messages between Duke and Dukes through any of the subpoenas that you had served to...
right, we executed a search warrant on his cell phone records. I do not recall seeing any telephone numbers between he and Ryan over the cell phone, no.
So that was an accurate statement.
Appeared to be, yes.
And he agreed during that meeting to cooperate with you in order to bring Ryan Duke to justice.
He did?
He agreed to try to contact him by phone, by message, if that would have assisted the GBI.
Yes.
Even though it never occurred, he even agreed to wear a wire, if you will, in order to try to record conversations.
Yes, he expressed fear about doing it with, worrying about Ryan's response to it. But yes, he did.
But that fear notwithstanding, he agreed, and he didn't hesitate to help the GBI bring Mr. Duke to justice.
At that point, yeah.
Okay. He also agreed and was cooperative in trying to get the forensic team to the correct location so that Ms. Grinstead's remains could be located.
Talking about taking us out there to,
Yeah.
yes, he tried, yes.
Okay. And I believe there was some difficulty in locating the exact site.
Correct. For him that day there was. Now, there was some follow-up, but I wasn't the agent that handled that follow-up.
That's right. And you don't believe that difficulty was intentional or that he was trying to mislead you and put you in the wrong place?
No, not based on what he was trying to do and then subsequently did the following day.
Correct. And that's because these wooded locations, these orchards, these trees, they grow, the landscape changes. What something looked like in 2005 is not what it would look like 10 plus years later.
Potentially, yes, sir. Well, obviously, over time, trees, bushes, they grow. And I think if you recall during the interview with him, I did ask him multiple times, is this, I know things may look different with these trees still here, so on and so forth. So I was trying to determine that, whether or not he could really recognize that area.
And he was ultimately able to get you to the location, or get the GBI, I should say, to the location where the remains were found.
He and his uncle, Randy Hudson.
Okay, very good. You were able to obtain the search warrant for Ryan Duke's DNA based on what Mr. Dukes had told you?
The day before, yes. And what Brooke had said, obviously, and there was another, I laid out all of the facts of the case, how it became about, and then added in those. Yes.
Now, you spoke with Mr. McCullough January 26, 2018.
Correct.
All right. This was 1 year, 7 months, 12 days after your first interview with him.
Mm-hmm.
You had not spoken with him between 2016 and 2018.
No.
No one at the GBI had spoken with him since 2016 to 2018?
No, not that I'm aware of, no. It wasn't me.
Okay.
If somebody else did, there's no investigative summary documenting any further contact.
All right. So there's nothing in the file to suggest that someone did?
Correct.
And if they did, it wasn't documented in any way, shape, or form?
I would assume another agent would have maybe told me if they had, but
And that's because you're the lead case agent. You need to know what's going on.
correct.
All right. Between 2016 and 2018, Mr. McCullough didn't call back into the GBI to talk with you all and follow up where things were, did he?
No. I think he called the DA's office. I do believe he called the DA's office, but I think that's it. Yeah. Never our office.
When was that call to the DA's office?
I'm not sure. I think one of the assistant attorneys, maybe Ms. Hart, had called or talked to me. We were talking, meeting with the case, and she mentioned, conducting a follow-up with Mr. McCullough.
Is that what triggered the interview on June 26, 2018?
Right. It's just a reminder, hey, it's probably a good idea, and I agree. Yeah, that's a good idea. We need to go back and record that interview with him.
Okay. And since your initial interview in 2016, there had been some developments. Ryan Duke had been arrested and charged with murder.
Yes.
Bo Dukes had been arrested and charged with hindering and concealment in the destruction of evidence tied to the burning of Ms. Grinstead's body.
Correct.
And many of the facts about that case have then been disclosed on national news and throughout media outlets.
Yes.
Now, during the interview on 2018, Mr. McCullough describes that F-150 as a single cab, long bed, manual transmission.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And during that interview, he says that a number of times. It stuck out in his mind because, as he told you, driving around in the thing. In fact, I took off for a couple of days in it.
Yes.
All right. You were able to run down photographs, information about Mr. Duke's truck.
I did.
In fact, you found the truck itself and were able to develop a number of photographs of it.
Mr. Dukes described in his interview that the truck he had was totaled when he was in Savannah or in that base, Fort Stewart, somewhere area. So what I did was contact through the insurance commission. I contacted them and found the insurance company that handled the claims on the vehicle and figured that they might have some photographs of the truck. Obviously, if that's the truck that was used, we try to get as much as we could, find it, maybe even try to process it if we could. So I got the photographs of the truck through the National Insurance Commission Board and through I think it was AUSA was the insurance company that had those photographs.
And it was a white F-150.
It was.
Was it long bed or short bed?
I don't remember.
Would it be helpful to see a photograph to
Sure.
refresh your recollection?
Sure. I mean, I can look at my case file too, but if you haven't, not in this one, but the other one I do.
Mr. Fox, this may be a good time to recess for lunch while you're looking for that. Okay. Members of the jury, I'm going to recess for lunch. It's noon. Be back in the jury room by 1:30 with these instructions, and that is you're not to discuss the case with anyone. Don't allow anyone to discuss it in your presence or in your hearing. Don't discuss it among yourselves until I give you instruction to do so. Now, with those instructions, you're free to go to lunch. Be back in the jury room by 1:30 so we can resume the trial.